So I've got 5 reasons why we believe the Porsche 997 Sport Classic is one of the most collectible 911s of all. So our first reason is its rarity. That's because there are only 250 of these built worldwide. That's an incredibly small number, and there are only around 25 UK supply cars. So to own one of these, especially in the UK, you're in a highly exclusive club. The nice thing about this is every single one is individually numbered, so there is a plaque inside the car where you can see exactly what number yours is of the 250. But to put it into perspective, just how rare this is, you compare it to some of the other limited edition Porsches. You know, the car that came after this was the 911 50th anniversary. There are 1,963 of those. You look at the 911R, there's 991 of those. Look at the 991 Speedster, I think there's 1,948. Even the 992 Sport Classic, which obviously is the successor to this, there were 1,250. So 250 is such a small number. It's one of the rarest 911s of all. The other thing worth mentioning is not one made it to North America, or not one was built for North America, but when one did actually end up over there in an auction, it sold for over $600,000, which is an incredibly high number, which shows just how rare and sought after these cars are. Okay, our second reason why we believe this is such a collectible car is actually the color combination. So I'll start off with the paint, and the thing that's special about this paint is called Sport Classic Grey, and there is no other Porsche that has this exact same color. It's basically patented for this car and this car only. So you'll never find another Porsche in this color. You might find similarities, and actually this was the thing that probably created desirability for this kind of color. So you've now got the likes of Crayon or Nardo Grey on an Audi, and it actually all kind of came from this car, where this sort of off-white chalky grey became incredibly desirable. And I'll tell you one interesting story, and this is just an example of how many people wanted their car to be painted in Sport Classic Grey. So Mr. Richard Hammond from Top Gear, I actually bought his GT3 RS 991 a few years back, and he specifically asked Porsche whether he could have a paint to sample Sport Classic Grey for his GT3 RS. They refused, they flat out refused. They said no other Porsche is allowed to have this color, only the 997 Sport Classic. And they said you can get something really similar, and the closest thing to Sport Classic Grey is something called Grigio Campovolo, which was in a bath color. So Richard Hammond went with that instead. And he had pleasure in telling me when I bought the car that he really wanted it to look exactly as close to this as possible. So this really was a bit of a sort of trendsetter in the paint. Obviously you've got those cool stripes that give it a more distinctive look. They are decals, but they go a whole way across the car, even on the ducktail spoiler. And even the 992 Sport Classic, when it came out, which is a very similar color, they actually called the color Sport Grey Metallic. So Sport Classic Grey is unique to this car and this car only. So obviously the other part of the color combination is the interior, and what you have here is something called espresso brown, which is the leather, and there is leather absolutely everywhere in this car, to the point where the only things that aren't leather are the actual buttons. But normally everything that is an option is actually standard on the Sport Classic as leather. And obviously the color brown, which maybe is not to everyone's taste, but you've seen recent years brown and tan interiors are having another resurgence. So again, this car is a little bit ahead of its time, and look, it's pretty cool. And obviously you've got this woven section in the seats, which are both on the front and rear. You've got the woven section on the door, and look, it's aged incredibly well. It looks almost new. And again, it inspired the likes of the Houndstooth, the Pepita interiors that you've seen on more modern Porsches, but actually this was the original of all those cars with that retro-inspired interior, which is totally unique to the Sport Classic. So number 3 is actually the several sort of unique and bespoke touches on this car. So I'll start off with the front splitter, which you'll notice is sculpted in a rather unusual way, which again is totally unique to the Sport Classic, but the more sort of important parts, which are more sort of retro inspired. First of all, you have the Fuchs alloys. So these are obviously alloys that you used to see in the 1960s and the 1970s 911s, and Porsche brought them back. They have been sort of upgraded, but they brought them back especially for the Sport Classic. Such a cool look, iconic alloys, and just make this car seem like from yesteryear. So another thing which is unique to the Sport Classic is the double bubble roof. So if you look closely, you'll see that the roof is sculpted in a way where it's inspired by the Carrera GT, which also has that double bubble roof. You see it on the likes of the Aston Martin Zagatos, and obviously it has some sort of aerodynamic effect, but part of the reason that Porsche say they do this is so that the driver and the passenger can actually put their helmets on and fit comfortably in the car, so they just have that little bit of raised on both those sections. And then back here is my favorite part of the car, and it is this ducktail spoiler, obviously named as such because of that ducktail look. But again, this was inspired by the Carrera RS from 1972, and it was the very first Porsche to have a ducktail spoiler since that car, so almost 4 decades. And actually, these have become so popular that people have created aftermarket versions of them, but actually this is the only car that officially has a OEM ducktail spoiler, and it just does look so cool, so iconic, and it's a shame you can't spec these on other cars, but that's why the Sport Classic is so unique and collectible, because it's one of the only cars with a ducktail spoiler. So number 4 is the manual gearbox. So at the time in 2009, 2010, manual gearbox was starting to get phased out really. They have had a bit of a resurgence lately with the likes of the 992 GT3 Touring, the 992 ST, but back then it was being phased out. So the fact that this car had a manual gearbox was just again sort of a nod to harking back to yesteryear, that retro feel of having the analog gearbox. And the nice thing about this car, this has the only option that's actually on the car, the short shifter. So the short shifts, which just makes it a bit more sporty to drive. And that's obviously pairing up with the engine, which you've got a Carrera S 3.8 litre naturally aspirated flat 6, but you've got the exclusive power kit, just giving you that little bit more power and pairing up beautifully. It's not an overpowering car, but it is the car where you can just really enjoy that analog drive, the beautiful sound of the naturally aspirated engine, and again, that creates this aura around the car of that importance, collectability, and of course, the analog feel. So the 5th and final reason why we believe the 997 Sport Classic is so collectible is for the simple reason that it is the ultimate trendsetter. So I've already talked about how the paint inspired a load of paints to be very similar to this car, but what's actually really important was this was the very first car to be built and designed by Porsche exclusive manufacturer department. So previously that department was only used for like personalization, so whether it was different trims, customized paints, or bespoke leather, that was what they were known for. But when Porsche said, look, we believe in your craftsmanship, your ideas, come up with a whole design of a car, they came up with this, one of the best looking 911s of all time, I believe. And that has inspired a whole range of models that came on after this, the Porsche 991 exclusive series, the 997 Speedster, and several others. But this was the OG. This is the car that set it up for Porsche, to make Porsche realize, actually looking back at their previous models and their heritage, to come up with new designs like this and like cars that have come on after this is big business for Porsche. So much so that they've come up with a whole load of heritage design packs for the Speedster 991, the Heritage Design Edition Targa. All of these cars where they're nodding back to their history really came from the idea of the Sport Classic. This was the original, this was the trendsetter, and it really showed Porsche the way forward. So that's it, 5 reasons why this car is so collectible, but this has got to be one of the car collector's dream cars, right? So many bespoke features, the Rarity. I mean, I remember when I first started at Romans, when this car had just come out, we had 2 of them for sale and couldn't sell them. I think they were slightly misunderstood, slightly underappreciated, but fast forward 15 years, they are now so loved, so understood, and obviously still so rare. These very, very rarely come up on the market. But look, we hope you enjoyed the video, hope you liked the car. Do leave your comments, let us know what you think. Is it the most collectible 911 of the modern era? We maybe think so. But look, stay tuned, give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you again very soon.